Hi, I'm Mandy and welcome to today's video. Today I wanted to talk about a little RPG that I've been playing a lot of this week, and that is Live A Live. So Live A Live is a 1994 Super Famicom RPG that was never released outside of Japan, until now. A couple weeks ago, Square Enix released a remake of the game in their new 2D HD art style, much like we've seen in Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy. So let's find out if this game is good, and if it holds up to the original. Quick side note before we begin, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be pronounced Live A Live, but Live A Live feels much more natural to me, so I'm sorry if I happen to mix it up throughout this video. So Live A Live is a game that is set up in a pretty unique way. When we first start up the game, we're presented with 7 different playable characters. Each character has an individual story chapter, and the player has the freedom to choose what order they wish to complete them in. What makes things even more interesting is that their stories are set in completely different time periods, and even countries in some cases. This ranges from prehistory, where humans haven't even learned to speak yet, to the distant future, where a young robot is solving a murder mystery on a spaceship. And we have everything in between: gunslinging in the Wild West, piloting mechs in the near future, solid snaking in Edo, Japan, and so on. While there's a general formula linking each chapter, they do have quite a few design differences between them. For example, some chapters have random encounters, some have visible enemies, and some have essentially none. They also vary greatly in terms of story to gameplay ratio. Most of your time in the ninja chapter is spent trying to infiltrate a castle, and it's huge. There's hours of gameplay here of stealthing or assault, if that's more your thing. In the robots chapter, on the other hand, you don't really have to do any battles for the most part. But there are significantly more cutscenes, which are quite good in my opinion. So in the beginning, it's almost like having 7 smaller games in one, and the time it takes to complete them varies quite a bit as well. I'd say somewhere between 1 and maybe 3 hours. This definitely brings a level of excitement to the game because you don't really know what to expect when you're starting a new chapter. I think part of the beauty of Live A Live is in the way that it blends different styles together. This also makes it more appealing to a wider audience because most people are probably going to find something that they like. By the same hand, though, your enthusiasm might waver between chapters depending on your preferences. But because they're essentially all bite-sized versions of a game, I think it balances out fairly well. So let's talk about the battle system. This is one of the few things that is exactly the same in every chapter. It's a bit of a spin on the active time battle system that Square was using in their Final Fantasy games at the time. Everyone has what they call a charge gauge, which is essentially a little timer that will determine when that person will be able to act. The additional layer in Live A Live, which makes it a bit more unique, is that we're actually fighting on a grid. Our moves are designed to hit squares in a specific pattern in respect to where our character is currently standing. So it's a bit of a blend of a tactical RPG and a more traditional active time battle system. Once your gauge is full, you can move across the board to get the right positioning, but with every step you take, your enemy's charge gauges will start to fill up, so if you go too far, they will attack you. I found this battle system really fun, but it did take me a minute to get used to the fact that the tiles an enemy is occupying isn't about where they're standing on the ground, it's literally about the squares that sprite is occupying on the screen, which kind of messes with your perception. Live A Live is no doubt a beautiful remake. I think this 2D HD style works quite well for it. I actually prefer the way it's done in Live A Live in comparison to the recent Triangle Strategy with its more 2D 3D style. For some reason I find the static camera much more comfortable in games like this. Live A Live is also full of great music. Every chapter has unique tracks to fit their individual atmospheres, which makes them feel even more like mini standalone games. The final boss track is an exception to this though, and it is awesome. The Switch version uses a rearranged version of the original soundtrack, and it's fantastic, but I do wish they would have given the option to play the game with the original soundtrack, because, I mean, RPG tracks from the 90s just hit differently, you know? From what I can tell, it seems like the remake is quite faithful to the original. My husband was playing the Aeon Genesis fan translation while I played the remake, and it was really cool to see how well they adapted the level designs, the story, the dialogue, and so on. That said, the remake did add a lot of features, which makes the game quite a bit easier to play. One such feature is the radar. This is the mini-map on the bottom right of the screen, which points you in the direction of your objective and also highlights doors. It definitely makes a difference, but fortunately it doesn't give you the entire answer if exploration is a key element to the chapter you're playing. In the ninja chapter, for instance, while it will highlight the pathway to your end goal, it won't help you find a way to move through the castle's locked doors and such. But it can help you remember where you've been and give you some footing. To be honest, that was a welcome change for me in this chapter because I got really lost trying to find the basement key. You can toggle the radar off if you want a more authentic experience though, which is great. I do think these sorts of maps can take some of the fun out of the exploration factor in a lot of cases. Another big difference is that the battle interface is much more user-friendly in the remake. It'll tell you what all of your moves do and what status effects they inflict, which is very helpful. It will also tell you what an enemy's strengths and weaknesses are, and you don't even have to go through any trial and error to find this out, which is surprising. It definitely makes the battles significantly easier. The original didn't even have a visible charge gauge, so it really feels like they've tried to streamline our experience in the remake. There are some other smaller things they've added which I really appreciate, like the ability to examine more items. They've also added voice acting, which is decent for the most part. I actually really enjoyed the voice acting in Cube's chapter. I think it helped to bring those characters to life, and because it was such a story-heavy chapter, it worked really well.
Look after Rachel, little one. If something happens, you can find me on the bridge.
Probably my main critique of the game, and the biggest deviation from the original, is just that it's easy. It feels like a very casual RPG for a number of reasons. One, you're constantly leveling brand new characters, so essentially you're playing the beginning of a game 8 times, and, you know, there's not a lot of difficulty there. I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a bit more to it later in the game, but most of your time is spent here. And like I mentioned earlier, the remake does hold your hand a lot more with the radar and the very transparent battle interface. There are also subtle changes in the puzzles throughout the story that significantly streamline things. So, is this a bad thing? I mean, yes and no. It can still be fun to play a lighter RPG, and that might even be exactly what you want sometimes. Oh, also, this is more a pet peeve than anything else, but there are gameplay tips on the loading screens, but the load time is never long enough that you can actually read any of them. You can access them in the menu, but it just bugs me that the game keeps flashing walls of text on the screen and doesn't give me a chance to read them. So at the end of the day, I'm a big fan of Live Alive and the Live Alive remake. I think it's such a fun and unique idea to make a game out of all these mini-games and to have such a variety of settings and protagonists. And the remake is so gorgeous and so much fun to play. The quality of life differences make it a much smoother experience, which I think is fantastic, even though it can arguably go a bit too far at times. So that's all from me. If you're playing Live Alive, let me know what your favourite chapter is because I would love to know. I am very partial to Cube myself. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.